But I don't know, when you look at those kids, you know, like on that picture, I was like, you know, is that the picture of, oops, where is it, the picture of health there or not, you know? There's a certain, you know, you do feel that these kids who have grown up from the day they were born eating this kind of food are incredibly healthy. And yeah, I would say the other thing is that most Americans with a processed food diet, with a lot of sitting in front of TV, sitting in front of, you know, in cars in school or whatever, they too tend to be heavier, and, you know, these kids work all the time, and they're strong and fit and healthy. So I recommend it.
Well, what do you do about weeds on this farm?
Henry has a lot of tactics. You know, the main one is weeding by hand, I suppose, and by, you know, he has a lot of weeding implements. He has small hand hoes, you know, that you go on the very close to the surface of the soil when the weeds are very small. There's stand-up hoes. He has, I don't know, a bunch of different kinds of hoes used for different kinds of weeding. But he's also a big believer in mulch, and so a lot of things get mulched, and once you get that mulch down, then you pretty much don't have a weed problem. He tries to never let the weeds go to seed. He's not always successful, so, you know, over time he's hoping that the seed bank in the soil is less of the weed seeds. He also thinks that you kind of have to live with it too, you know. He's never going to have a perfectly weed-free field, and that's okay. But it's really hard in the first part of the season, and like May and June, when we have the rain and the sunshine and everything's growing like crazy, and those weeds, they can grow about 10 times as fast as the plants. And if you don't get them out when you need to, it's a problem. He's actually looked for some extra labor, but it's been hard to find. He doesn't need extra labor the whole season, but he needs like extra hands for a week, say in June, to really get ahead of the weeds. And it's been hard for him to find that labor. So if anybody's interested, let me know. Cash.
I do have a question for you. It's kind of two parts, so I hope it makes sense going together. First of all, is how do you justify or encourage the public, which organic materials for organic produce, which is obviously all the benefits we get agriculturally and environmentally. However, the cost of it seems so much higher than the mass produced, which is understandable.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we encourage general public, especially in a time of recession, to be able to go out and access and be able to afford that organic food, and also how tying that into urban areas, I'm wondering how they are able to access that as well.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, because right now there is a difference in price, although it's often not as much as people think it is. Of course, the one thing is nutrition too. It's like, well, you can buy one lousy tomato for 49 cents a pound and get half the amount of nutrition, or you can buy another tomato for $2 a pound that gives you twice or more times nutrition. So you can always play with it that way too. The cheap cost of food of our current food system is a problem, because so many of the costs are externalized, and so much of the packaged food, the processed food, is subsidized. So you're paying for it. It's just coming out of your taxes. You know, and of course we don't see that when we get the receipt from the grocery store. Nobody thinks, oh yeah, plus some of my taxes. So, you know, it's a false cheapness. You know, it's only cheap, again, in a very narrow definition of the word. But what I saw, because I know it's a real problem, and you know, I just try to encourage people to do what they can. First of all, you can grow some food, even if you don't have a yard or a farm. You can grow some herbs, and it's really cheap to buy seed, and you can grow a lot of food with a very low input of costs in seed. So if you really want to, plant a few tomato plants, and you'll get tons of tomatoes from it for almost nothing. So that's one thing you can do, is take it into your own hands, grow some yourself. Or you can have it like a treat, you know. I mean, even when I had no money, I still don't have much money, but I'm a college student or whatever, and every once in a while I would treat myself to, you know, a vanilla milkshake or a chocolate ice cream. And it's like, okay, treat yourself once in a while to an organic tomato, or, you know, from your local farmer. If that's all you can do, that's fine. The other thing is look into CSAs. I don't know what prices they are around here. I know that they're quite expensive in Chicago, but my brother's CSA down in Bloomington area is the cheapest I know of. And every year we take a few of his shares. People get 7 to 9 different vegetables every week, you know, for a certain set price that they pay up front. And I go to the grocery store and I say, if those people in the CSA had got the same thing that week, 2 cucumbers, 6 tomatoes, a bunch of lettuce, and parsley, whatever they got that week, I go to the Jewel store in Bloomington Normal and I price it out. And I've done this year after year just to kind of test it. And almost invariably, you would have paid twice as much for non-organic food at the local Jewel than you paid for Henry's CSA. Now, I can't guarantee that everybody's CSA is the same, and Henry has a idea that this food should be affordable, and he also knows that people gave him a chunk of money up front. They subscribed, they paid him $400 all at once for 26 weeks of produce, and so he figures he should give them a deal, and if it's a good season, which with Henry it almost always is, they get way more than the minimum that he guarantees them, 7 to 9 different vegetables. But then one time last week they got 16 ears of corn, and that was just one of their 7 to 9 items because he had a good week for sweet corn. So, you add all that up, and for their $14 that they paid up front, they're getting $20, $30 worth of produce. So you might look into some CSAs and see if that might be an affordable way to do it.
I was wondering, what's up with the whole raw milk thing, and what do you think about that?
What's up with the whole raw milk thing? That's a really interesting question. Are you talking about Wisconsin? What happened in Wisconsin recently? Oh, okay. There was a farm in Wisconsin that a bunch of people were they had a cow share. They had paid for a share of a cow, and then they owned the cow, so to speak, and then they could get raw milk from it. And it turned out 35 people got very sick with Campylobacter. And I think 21 of them were under 18, and it can be really hard on kids sometimes to get that. So anyway, raw milk, I would not advise getting raw milk unless you're very, very knowledgeable about the farmer that you're getting it from, and that you've seen them wash the cow's udder and sanitize it and put the machine on, hopefully a machine. Not only, people say I grew up with raw milk. In fact, I get raw milk from my neighbor, so sometimes. But I know them and I've seen them work, and it's legal in Illinois, but you have to go to the farm with your own container and get it. The farmer can't transport it, and I'm glad that it's legal in Illinois. I think people should have that choice. I think we should have a choice if we want raw milk. But I would also say be very, very careful, because these days there's a lot of microorganisms flying around that weren't flying around, when my parents were growing up or my grandparents were growing up. I actually think that because of the feeding of antibiotics to our animals in the livestock facilities, there's a lot of scary things out there that weren't out there when, a generation or two ago. So, I know there's websites that say that raw milk will cure everything and anything, and I just don't believe that, no matter what it is. It sounds like snake oil when they start saying that, So I think raw milk is fine. I think if you have your own animal and you get milk straight from your animal and drink it, I think that's fine. Or if you really know your neighbor and you know how they milked their cow, if they stored it, how they stored it, where they stored it, temperatures they stored it, then I would be okay with it. I would just say be very careful, because it's not. It's a very good medium for growing bacteria.
Tara, I have a few questions from our live webcast listeners.
Oh, really?
Yes. The first question is, how many hours per day does Henry spend in the field?
Sun up to sundown.
Okay.
So at this time of year, it's 10 or 12 hours, and then by the time the solstice, by the time the maximum number of hours, which is about 18 hours of sunlight, he will work from 4 or 5 in the morning until 9 at night. He works every single hour that the sun is shining because he says he has to keep up with the chloroplasts. But you know what? For him, I could read you another excerpt from the book he recently wrote, which says for him it's not work. It's just what he does. So.
The second, I think you've already answered, but just in case we've missed anything, what is the core or fundamental piece that makes the farm sustainable?
Oh, the core thing that makes the farm sustainable. Well, everything he does, and I think it maybe rests in the life of the soil, building the life of the soil, and everything kind of follows from there.